Greetings, fellow Bible readers. Welcome to week 41 of our Bible read-through. This week we finally arrive in the New Testament. After finishing up the last couple of chapters of Malachi, we cover a good chunk of the book of Matthew, the first book of the New Testament, and also the first of the four Gospels that record the life of Jesus. As we begin to enter into the New Testament, one thing that you will especially want to watch for is references to the prophecies from the Old Testament. So we get to see the fulfillment of many of those prophecies that we saw and read about in the Old Testament. And Matthew is actually a book that is very full of biblical references to Old Testament prophecies of the Savior. So lots of opportunities to watch for the fulfillment of those prophecies and how they're singled out in Matthew's Gospel. So let's get down to the details for each day of reading. On day 1, as we cover chapters 2 through 4 of Malachi, you'll notice especially right at the end of the book, Malachi almost seems to blend Jesus' first coming as the Savior to bring us righteousness and his second coming at the end of the world to judge the living and the dead. He almost seems to blend those two comings into one. And when you think about that, it's helpful to remember that a lot of those Old Testament prophets, when they predicted those coming events of the future, they looked at them kind of the same way that we look at a range of mountains when we're driving towards them. It's hard to tell the distances between those mountains. They just kind of look like they're all right close to each other, but it's only as you get closer and drive into them that you start to notice there's some pretty big distances between some of those mountains. And so it's only as we start to get to the fulfillment of those prophecies that we start to see that some of these events the prophets talk about are split apart very greatly by time. Then on day 2, as we begin the Gospel of Matthew with Matthew chapters 1 through 4, you'll notice that Matthew begins his Gospel with a genealogy. And this genealogy traces the family ancestry of the Savior from Abraham up to Jesus. And that's a very significant genealogy because that the fact that it starts with Abraham drives home to us that God fulfilled his promise to send the Savior from Abraham's family. It also helps to clue us in to Matthew's intended audience. He was writing mainly to people who were very familiar with the Old Testament, and especially to those who had a vested interest in Abraham. He was writing to the Jewish people. And so kind of helpful to have that background information. Then on day 3, as we look at Matthew chapters 5 through 7, we get one of Jesus' very famous sermons, the Sermon on the Mount. In that sermon, Jesus spends a great deal of time explaining and applying God's law. Then on day 4, as we look at Matthew chapters 8 through 10, we get a number of miracles that our Savior Jesus performed, as well as a strong emphasis on the importance of faith. And then finally, as we look at days 5, 6, and 7, covering Matthew 11 all the way up through Matthew chapter 18, you'll notice that while we still do get some miracles performed by Jesus and a couple of events from the Savior's ministry, there's a much greater emphasis on Jesus' teaching. And we also, as we go through those 3 days of readings, we start to notice an increasing amount of opposition to the Savior Jesus. That's worthwhile for us to note and remember that Jesus' ministry was not simply one long victory parade. It wasn't just simply joyful event and successful preaching engagement after joyful event and successful preaching engagement. There were a lot of challenges that Jesus faced as well. And so it should be no surprise to us that as we follow our Savior in this life, that our lives mirror the same path as his, that we too experience joys as well as sorrows as we go through this life. That's all for this week. We'll see you next week.